Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaining Man here, and when I say gaining I mean muscle, not fat, because that's not what I'm trying to do at the moment. Anyway, welcome back to another bloody video, and today I thought I would talk about a question I consistently keep getting asked, and that is about what do I perceive to be the worst games console ever. I suppose that sounds a little bit like that Simpsons comic book guy would say, wasn't it? Worst console ever. So let's discuss that today. I suppose it's quite a subjective question really, which could considerably differ from person to person, depends who you ask. Something I've heard a lot of people say in response to this question is the worst console ever is apparently the Philips CDI for some strange reason. And I've done a video in the past actually about how that's wrong. Like, how can... It's underrated, if anything. The Philips CDI has a large library of games, some of which are actually quite good and quite playable. And apart from that, as well, it has other functions as well, like the fact that it can play video CDs and acts as a system that can use multimedia programs, etc. So it's arguable whether it's a games console in the first place. Either way, it's certainly not the worst games console of all time. It's not even the worst multimedia device of all time. There's like lots which are much worse. So I guess some people just aren't very educated and must base a lot of their gaming information off of just watching stuff like the Angry Video Game Nerd rather than actually buying systems and playing them for themselves. Like, how many of these people who claim the Philips CDI is the worst system of all time have actually played on them? I do not personally believe many of them would have. Another system which I reviewed in depth a couple of weeks ago, which gets accused of being the worst system of all time quite a lot, is the Sega 32X. Again, playing the Sega 32X today, there isn't a whole lot wrong with it. It's got a really small library of games, but if you're going to look at it on a ratio of good games to bad games, the ratio is actually quite good. There's quite a lot of decent games on the system. Knuckles Chaotix, personally I think that game's fantastic, and there's also a decent amount of good arcade ports as well. Like, you've got a great version of Space Harrier on there, you've got a great version of Afterburner, and then you've got some unique games on there too, like Tempo, Calibri, etc. So once again, I don't get why the Sega 32X gets bullied quite as badly as it does, because really, it's not awful. I can see why you wouldn't have bought it back in 1995, because obviously the Sega Saturn was coming out at the same time, if you had any sense. The Sony PlayStation, that's what most people bought, didn't they? So it was a dated piece of hardware when it was released. But today, the library's okay, not a bad system at all. What else gets a lot of bad rap? The Virtual Boy, another system that just doesn't deserve to get the amount of heat put on the platform. Yes, it was bad for something Nintendo made, because let's be fair to Nintendo for a change. They've got a good track record of making decent systems, but once again, a lot of fun can be had with the Virtual Boy. Very small library, but amongst that library, there is a good ratio of decent games. Wario Land on the Virtual Boy, very decent. Teleroboxer, decent. There's just a lot of decent games on the platform, and I've played every Virtual Boy game, so I can vouch for that. You can easily have a good amount of fun with the Virtual Boy. So once again, anyone who says the Virtual Boy is the worst console ever, they're talking out their arse once again. So let's think about which system actually is the worst of all time. I suppose with this, there are just so many systems, and the actual worst systems aren't normally even talked about, because they sold so badly that most people haven't played them or even watched many YouTube videos about them, because not many YouTubers own the actual worst consoles of all time. So it's really hard to even know where to go there. But I can tell you my worst system I've ever played and which one I own. For me, it was the Waltera Supervision, or Quickshot Supervision. In fact, the Supervision has a variety of different names depending on where you're based in the world, because it was sold worldwide. Basically, I've told this story on my channel before because I've made a whole in-depth video about this system. The Waltera Supervision was made to compete directly with the Game Boy. It was a handheld gaming device. Basically, the company who manufactured it had noticed that the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear, and the Turbo, what was it called? The PC Engine GT. All three of those were high-end handhelds, which were much more powerful than the Game Boy. All three failed ridiculously, mainly due to the fact that they were more expensive than the Game Boy, and what made them even worse was the fact that those three systems had ridiculously terrible battery life. So, what did Waltera decide to do? They decided to take the opposite route. They looked at the Game Boy, saw this system's doing well because it's really budget. So, they decided to release a handheld that was even cheaper and even more budget than the Game Boy. So that's what the Waltera was. So it was budget to begin with. However, if you're as crazy as me and have made the time to play every single bloody game released on the platform, and there were quite a lot to be fair, nearly all of them are complete unplayable tripe. Like absolutely awful games. And the only games that hold any merit to them whatsoever are basically games which were like bootleg versions of other games. Like, for example, there was a knockoff version of Dr. Mario on the system that was playable, and a few other blatant knockoffs as well. So anything that was decent-ish, you could get on the Game Boy anyway. So for me, so far, the worst system I've ever played on is the Waltera Supervision. In fact, by quite a long way. It doesn't have many redeeming features. So it was so budget that it wasn't even worth buying, even though it was ridiculously cheap. But this brings me on to another point. There are a number of other budget handhelds quite similar to the Supervision, which I am yet to play because they're just hard to track down because they sold so badly. So the Waltera Supervision might not even be the worst handheld of all time, because like I said, there's so many more I'd like to get. You've got out there, you've got the Mega Duck, haven't got a Mega Duck yet. You've got the Game Mate, you've got the Cougar Boy, and you've got a number of others. What else have you got? You've got the GP32 from Korea, you've got the Gizmondo. So all of these odd handhelds haven't got round to giving a go on yet. So yes, the Waltera Supervision is the worst one I played, but I would guess, because I'm only guessing here, I'm not saying for definite, that probably all of these handhelds are worse than systems like the CDI and the 32X and the Virtual Boy. So really, people should stop giving those platforms so much grief. It's like, would you really kick someone when they're down on the floor? Because that's what you're essentially doing with those systems. Like, if you're going to critique something, at least critique something that's going to take a little bit of work. Like, I don't know, the Sony PlayStation or something like that. Something what's you can actually bring something new to the table. But these, in fact, let's talk about CDI and all those for a second again. You can't really call them bad consoles. You got to call them average consoles, I suppose, because you put them right in the middle of the spectrum in terms of gaming history, I suppose, and what's great, what's okay, what's average, and then what's a bit crap, then what's awful right at the bottom. And something like the Supervision is truly awful, I suppose. And another reason why I felt like talking about the Supervision today is because I made that video on my round the world trip last year when I travelled planet Earth for an entire year. In fact, I covered a number of different handhelds in my little series I made called Handhelds Around the World. Well, you see, give it, how long? About 6 more weeks. I'm going on a little trip again. I'm going back to Greece for 2 more months, back to the sun, which will be lovely. And once I get there, I'm going to continue to explore the country and make a whole nother Greek series of handhelds around the world. I've got a few ideas, I've got a few different systems I've already procured and intend to cover, but if any one of you at home have actually got any really obscure handhelds which nobody really talks about, then I would love you to contact me in either the comment section or on Twitter at TopHatGamingMan, because I would either love to have you donate these systems to me, or I'd even be happy, to be fair, to potentially buy these systems from you, or even lend perhaps. Either way, I would like some of these obscure handhelds in my hand so I can play them, experience them and review them in depth so I can present the full story of them to all of you on this channel. So, Handhelds Around the World is coming back, and hopefully we can find a system which is even worse than the supervision. Wouldn't that be interesting, eh? No? Perhaps? Maybe? Who knows? Anyway, before I go, one more thing. I've got a secondary channel, I don't know if all of you have checked it out yet, called Top Hat Chat, where myself and a gentleman I am friends with, called Mr. Street, basically get together on my sofa and talk about various different subjects gaming wise. Tonight we have also uploaded a video on there about toxic fandom, so if you want to hear us discuss and moan about that, then subscribe to Top Hat Chat too. Obviously there's a card link here for you to click. Cheerio!
Born in London in '86, a mustachioed gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's getting at handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.